It's very hard not to have expectations of your own performance. And that's something I want to address today because there are a lot of players, and myself included there, that are in a constant struggle with expectations of ourselves and balancing the kind of good and bad emotions that we might have and trying to rationally talk back to the negative ones and set ourselves up so that things that might trigger those negative emotions to come up in the game don't really hit us, and instead we're able to just focus on performing and making decisions. And these are two separate things: your emotional state and your ability to perform, but they are also related at the same time. So it could be the case that you feel really bad about your performance and you're having a bad performance, or it could be that you feel actually good about your, like, where you are in the game even though you're having a bad performance. So for example, there are many situations where I can recognize that my opponent just really hit a great shot, or that I experimented or I took a risk, or it was the case that I'm not really getting many spots, like good spots to play in this game. By being fair to myself in those moments and by keeping my head clear, I can have a bad performance because I'm getting outshot, or because my decision was just incorrect, or because there's some other variance in action, like something to do with maybe my teammates, or maybe there's just that randomness with timings that can happen in any FPS game. Like whatever it might be, there's a lot of things that are outside of my control. And so it's important to try to do your best job in firstly accepting where your performance is. Maybe you're not hitting your best shots today, and making sure that you're also fair to yourself to understand, okay, yeah, you have 0 kills this half, but how many spots did you get? Are you the B player on Mirage, constantly, rotating into those A retakes that are impossible? Or are you a player that just has very poor support on your team? And it can also be the case that the opponents are playing really well to actually give you almost no options to actually get into the game. Like, all these things can be possible, and you can still be in a place where you're actually probably performing good in that day, but you just haven't had enough rounds yet to really display that. You haven't had enough opportunities to really display that. And so that's a very important thing to think about, because it can be the case that you could actually have great performances today. It's just that you're not getting the spots. So you don't want to be in a place where you're starting to make mistakes because you draw this correlation between the outcomes of the situation and how you're playing, because you're unable to separate the variance and some of these things that are outside of your control from what is in your control, because you're allowing the outcomes to speak to you emotionally. And it could be that it tells you, oh, you're missing your shot, so you're a bad player, or this guy is better than you, or you're performing not as you would expect on the scoreboard, or you feel like you're letting your teammates down, or you're feeling maybe ashamed because you just have an expectation that you should be able to somehow do better. Like, how realistic or rational are these expectations and these thoughts? I mean, do they really matter? Like, honestly, not really. We shouldn't really have expectations, because it's kind of wild to have expectations in an environment that has so many things out of our control. All we can do is just do our best to make good decisions and stay in a place where we're solving problems and being fair to ourselves as well. And understanding that it doesn't really matter what anyone else thinks of you. You're on your own journey of improvement, and you're really in your own place in the range of your performance today, and you can't even really control that too much. All you can really do is work on your game, and over time that range will get tighter, and hopefully you'll be able to access your A game more frequently. You'll be able to path your way there because you understand your own performance is better and better over time. And also, as you become less reactive and the expectations and you're less connected to the outcomes, like, you handle these things better, now your emotional states won't be getting in the way as much in allowing you to access that A game if you do start the day in your C game. This is very possible to recover through the C all the way back to the A game on a day where you have a bad performance. But it comes down to you so much. So understand that if you're having negative emotions, or the game is not feeling good, this is an opportunity to practice that awareness that I talk about so much, because the awareness is just data. So if you're having a bad game and you're not maybe fragging very much, let's look at that. Let's look at the feelings you're having. Like, what are the feelings you're having? Are you feeling ashamed? Okay, well, let's talk back to that shame. Does that make sense? Is what's happening right now in the game, is it all in your control? Like, are you just being outshot at the moment. And is that fair that you can be outshot by another player? I mean, absolutely. I mean, some players can be on absolute heaters and other players can have good games too. And, not every play that you make is going to be successful. Like, how many things are outside of your control? Like, really start to try to rationally understand whether those emotions or those thoughts that you have are kind of justified. This is very much a kind of cognitive behavioral therapy type approach where you're understanding what you're thinking and feeling, and then trying to rationally talk back to it so you can remove the thoughts and the feelings that are distorted. And whenever there's any expectation present and maybe a negative emotion is elicited, it can very often be the case that there's a negative distortion. So the reality is actually distorted. It's not actually real. You're completely overblowing it. And this is just a part of our human psychology. We tend to overemphasize the negative and underemphasize the positive. So with all of that in mind, next time you're entering a performance, try not to have an expectation that it's good or bad. And this also applies to performance when, let's say, you've been having some great performances. If you've been having some great performances, it's very easy to go into the next day expecting that you should just perform that way again. And that's just not how it works. So you want to be able to kind of go into each day with that kind of clean slate, understanding that you're on this journey of improvement. Your performance on any given day can be anywhere within your range, and that's just part of your range that you're experiencing. And just work through it. Just try to make good decisions, try to play well, and just keep focusing on all of the goals and mental approaches that you have to growing as a player. And with all of that said, best of luck on your journey. Make sure to temper your expectations, keep them realistic. Talk back rationally to the negative kind of thoughts that you might have or feelings, and try to frame it all within that growth mindset of you practicing, you training, you getting experience to tighten up that range and to get better. With that said, I hope you enjoyed this. See you on the next one.